Blood dripped onto my doorstep before I even opened the door. I heard the knock first, 3 heavy thuds that shook the frame, followed by a low groan that did not sound like a man asking for help. It sounded like a man trying not to fall down. I froze with my hand on the lock, my heart slamming against my ribs, because at 11 at night, in a building where half the lights in the hallway had burned out months ago, a knock like that never meant anything good. I looked through the peephole and saw him leaning against the wall across from my door, one hand pressed hard against his side, his shirt soaked dark red beneath his fingers. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a suit that had probably cost more than my monthly rent, and even doubled over in pain. There was something commanding about the way he held himself, like bleeding out on a stranger's doorstep was simply an inconvenience he intended to survive. My name is Grace Bennett. I work night shifts as an emergency room nurse, which meant I had seen more blood in my career than most people see in a lifetime. But none of it prepared me for the moment I opened my own door to a stranger who looked like he had walked straight out of trouble and had no intention of explaining how. "Please," he said, his voice rough, controlled even through the pain. "Do not call anyone. I can pay you. Just let me sit down for a moment." I should have shut the door. Every instinct trained into me by every safety class I had ever taken told me to shut the door, lock it, and call the police. But upstairs, my 6-year-old daughter Lily was asleep, and something about the way this man's eyes moved past me, scanning the hallway behind him, told me that whatever chased him here was far more dangerous than anything I could imagine standing in my kitchen. "You need a hospital," I said, keeping my voice low and steady, the same voice I used on frightened patients. "No hospitals." His jaw tightened. "They will find me there. Please, 5 minutes." There was a rawness in the way he said please, like the word did not come easily to him, like begging was foreign to his mouth. I glanced down the hallway, empty and dim, then back at him, at the blood now dripping steadily onto the carpet outside my apartment, leaving a trail that would be impossible to explain if anyone came looking. Against every warning bell ringing in my head, I stepped back and let him in. He moved past me slower than I think he wanted to, one hand still pressed to his side, the other braced against the wall. Up close, under the hallway light, I could see the wound properly, a deep gash just below his ribs, the kind that needed stitches and monitoring, not a kitchen table and a nurse who was technically off duty and completely unequipped. "Sit," I said, pointing to a kitchen chair, already moving toward the small first aid kit I kept under the sink, the one meant for scraped knees and small burns, not something like this. He sat, and for the first time, I saw his face fully in the light. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with sharp features and dark eyes that watched me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. There was no panic in those eyes. Even wounded, even bleeding in a stranger's kitchen, he looked like a man who was calculating every possible outcome of this moment, weighing whether trusting me was a mistake he could afford to make. "What is your name?" I asked, cutting away the ruined fabric of his shirt with a pair of scissors, trying to keep my hands from shaking. He hesitated. "Damien. Just Damien. No last name, no explanation, nothing about how he ended up bleeding outside my door in the middle of the night." I did not push. In the emergency room, I had learned that some people talk when they are ready, and some people never talk at all, and either way, the wound in front of me needed attention before anything else mattered. "This needs stitches, Damien. Real stitches, not butterfly bandages. Can you do it?" I paused, scissors still in hand. "I am a nurse, not a surgeon. But you know how." It was not a question. He was right, of course. I had assisted in enough procedures, closed enough minor wounds under supervision during my training, that I could manage this if I had the right supplies, which I did not. Not here, not in my apartment at midnight with my daughter asleep 2 rooms away. "I have a suture kit at work," I said slowly, my mind already running through the risks of what I was about to suggest. "I could get it, but you would need to stay very still and very quiet, because if my daughter wakes up and sees a stranger in the kitchen covered in blood, I do not know how I explain that to her." Something shifted in his expression then, something I could not quite name. It was not softness exactly, but the sharp edges of his face eased slightly, like the mention of my daughter had reminded him that he was sitting inside someone else's carefully built life, a life he had no right to endanger. "I will be quiet," he said. "I promise you that." I left him at the table with a clean towel, pressed hard against the wound, and drove the 12 minutes to the hospital where I worked, moving through the familiar halls like a ghost, grabbing supplies I would have to explain later if anyone noticed them missing. My hands trembled the entire drive back, not from fear exactly, but from the strange, dizzying awareness that I had just made a decision that could not be undone. When I returned, he was exactly where I left him, pale, sweating, but conscious, his dark eyes tracking me the moment I stepped through the door. "You came back," he said, and there was something almost surprised in his voice, as if a part of him had expected me to call the police the second I walked out. I said I would. I worked quickly and carefully, cleaning the wound, threading the needle, focusing on the mechanics of the task instead of the fact that a man I knew nothing about was sitting shirtless in my kitchen, watching me with an attention that felt like it was memorizing every detail of my face. He did not flinch once, not when the needle pierced skin, not when I pulled the thread tight, and that stillness unsettled me more than pain would have. It told me he was used to enduring far worse than this. "You are very calm," I said, trying to fill the silence, trying to steady my own nerves as much as his. "Panic does not help," he said simply. "It only slows you down." "Is that a lesson from experience?" His eyes met mine, dark and unreadable. "Everything I know is a lesson from experience." I did not ask what he meant. I finished the stitches, bandaged the wound properly, and gave him instructions he probably already knew, about keeping it clean, about watching for infection, about resting so it could heal. He listened without interrupting, nodding once when I finished, and for a moment, sitting there in my small kitchen with the early hours of morning creeping toward the windows, he looked less like the dangerous stranger who had knocked on my door, and more like an exhausted man who had not slept properly in longer than he wanted to admit. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I mean that." "You should go somewhere safe," I told him, wrapping the leftover bandages back into their packaging, avoiding his eyes because something about the way he was looking at me felt like too much. "Wherever you came from, whatever this is, my apartment cannot be that place." "I know." He stood slowly, testing the stitches, wincing slightly, but holding himself upright. "I will go before your daughter wakes." He reached into his jacket, the one I had laid over the back of a chair, and pulled out a folded stack of bills, thicker than anything I had ever held in my hand. He set it on the table without ceremony, like it meant nothing to him, like the amount was not even worth mentioning. "I cannot take that," I said immediately. "You saved my life. Take it for your daughter, if not for yourself." I looked at the money, then at him, torn between the practical reality of my bills piling up on the counter and the uneasy feeling that accepting anything from this man meant accepting a connection to whatever world he came from, a world that had put a bullet wound in his side in the first place. "I do not want trouble," I said finally. "I have a daughter to think about." "There will be no trouble," he said, though something flickered behind his eyes that made the promise feel fragile, like a wall built too quickly to hold against a storm. No one followed me here. I made certain of that before I knocked. I wanted to believe him, standing in my kitchen in the gray light before dawn, exhausted and strangely unwilling to watch him walk out the door, despite every rational reason to want exactly that. I realized I already believed him more than I should have. He moved toward the door, favoring his side slightly, and paused with his hand on the handle, looking back at me one last time. "I will not forget this, Grace." I had not told him my name. The realization hit me only after the door had closed behind him, after I heard his footsteps fade down the hallway, after the apartment fell silent except for the sound of my own breathing. He had known it before I said it, which meant he had known more about me before he ever knocked on my door than I knew about him now. I moved through the apartment quietly, gathering the stained towels and the wrapper from the suture kit, hiding everything at the bottom of a trash bag I would carry out myself rather than leave in the building bin, where a curious neighbor might notice. My hands were still not steady, and every small sound, the creak of a pipe, the hum of the refrigerator, made me flinch, as though the danger that had followed him here might still be lingering somewhere just outside my walls. I checked on Lily before I did anything else, easing her bedroom door open just enough to see her curled beneath her blanket, one arm thrown over her stuffed rabbit, breathing slow and even, in the particular stillness that only sleeping children have. Looking at her, small and unaware of everything that had happened only a few rooms away, I felt the full weight of what I had risked by opening that door. I had spent 6 years building a life careful enough to keep her safe, working double shifts, avoiding anything that might introduce chaos into the fragile stability I had constructed. And in a single night, a stranger bleeding in my hallway had cracked that carefulness wide open. And yet, standing in her doorway, I could not make myself regret it. There had been something in his eyes when he begged me not to call anyone, something that told me refusal would not have simply sent him elsewhere. It might have cost him everything. I told myself that was the reason I helped him, the same instinct that had made me choose nursing in the first place, the inability to walk past someone bleeding and do nothing. I stood there for a long time, staring at the folded money on my table, at the blood-stained towels I would need to hide before Lily woke for breakfast, and at the strange, unsettling certainty that whatever had just walked out of my apartment was not finished with me yet. Somewhere in the city, sirens wailed faintly in the distance, and I found myself wondering, with a chill that had nothing to do with the cold morning air, whether they were looking for him, and whether I had just become part of a story I never agreed to join. 3 days later, I found him standing outside my building again, and this time he was not bleeding, but he was not leaving either. I nearly dropped the grocery bags in my arms when I saw him leaning against the brick wall near the entrance, dressed in a dark coat, looking like he belonged there, like he had every right to be waiting for me on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Lily was holding my hand, chattering about her day at school, and the moment she spotted him, she stopped talking and stared with the open curiosity only a child has. "You should not be here," I said quietly, stepping slightly in front of Lily, though I was not sure what I thought I was protecting her from anymore. "I know," Damien said, his eyes flicking briefly to my daughter before returning to me. "I came to see how the stitches were healing, nothing more. You could have called. I do not have your number." It was such a simple, almost ordinary thing to say, and yet it landed strangely. A reminder that whatever had happened between us 3 nights ago had been built entirely on desperation and silence, not on the small normal exchanges that usually came before 2 people knew anything real about each other. A neighbor passed us in the hallway just then, an older woman named Margaret who had lived in the building longer than anyone, and she gave Damien a curious once-over before nodding politely and continuing toward the stairs. I felt my cheeks warm, aware suddenly of how this must look, a strange man waiting outside my door in the middle of the afternoon, and aware too of how little control I actually had over what people assumed. Lily tugged on my sleeve. "Mommy, who is that?" I glanced down at her wide brown eyes, then back up at Damien, who was watching the exchange with an expression I could not quite place, something between caution and curiosity, like he was unused to being looked at by a child without fear. "A friend," I said carefully, the word feeling strange in my mouth. "He was just leaving." "I was hoping," Damien said, "that I could walk you both inside, just to make sure you get in safely." There was something in the way he said it, quiet and deliberate, that told me this was not really about walking us to the door. It was about him wanting a few more minutes in a world that felt ordinary, a world with grocery bags and a little girl asking questions, and a woman who had not yet decided whether to be afraid of him. Against my better judgment, again, I said yes. Inside my apartment, Lily warmed to him faster than I expected, faster than I was entirely comfortable with. She showed him her drawings, spread across the kitchen table in a chaotic rainbow of crayon, and he looked at each one with a seriousness that surprised me, asking questions about the purple dog with 3 legs and the house with a triangle for a roof, as if her answers mattered as much as anything he might hear in whatever meetings filled his actual days. He turned one drawing over in his hands slowly, studying the crooked lines of a sun with too many rays, and for a moment, I watched something unguarded cross his face, an expression I would come to recognize later as the rare, quiet look of a man remembering a happiness he thought he had lost permanently. "You are good with her," I said, once Lily had run off to find another drawing to show him. "I had a sister once," he said, his voice dropping into something quieter, something I had not heard from him before. She used to draw like that. Everything a little bit wrong, and a little bit perfect at the same time. Had? His jaw tightened, and for a moment, the warmth that had crept into his expression while talking to Lily disappeared entirely, replaced by the same guarded coldness I had seen in my kitchen 3 nights earlier. She is gone. It was a long time ago. I did not push, sensing the door he had just shut, but the admission told me more than he probably intended. Whatever had made this man the kind of person who bled quietly on doorsteps and carried enough cash to hand a stranger without blinking, it had cost him people he loved along the way. My closest friend at the hospital, a nurse named Priya, who had worked beside me for years and knew almost everything about my life, noticed the change in me before I ever said a word about it. We were folding linens together during a slow stretch of an overnight shift, when she finally asked, without looking up from the sheets in her hands, why I kept smiling at my phone like a teenager. "It is nothing," I said, though the heat rising to my cheeks betrayed me completely. "Grace Bennett, I have watched you turn down every single person who has asked you out since your daughter was born. Something is different, and you are going to tell me what it is." I hesitated, unsure how much of the truth I could safely share. Unsure even how to describe a man who had walked into my life bleeding and refused to leave it quietly afterward. "There is someone," I finally admitted. "It is complicated." "It is always complicated," Priya said, setting down the sheets to give me her full attention. "That is what makes it worth paying attention to. Just be careful. You have Lily to think about, and I have seen you protect that little girl from everything, including yourself sometimes." Her words stayed with me longer than I expected, a quiet warning threading through the following days, even as Damien continued finding small reasons to appear at my door. Over the following 2 weeks, he came back more than once, always with some small reason, checking the wound, bringing groceries he claimed he had extra of, fixing a loose hinge on my kitchen cabinet that I had been meaning to repair for months. Each visit was brief, careful, like he was testing how much space he was allowed to take up in a life that was not his. I told myself I was only allowing it because Lily liked him, because he had never once given me a real reason to be afraid, because the money he had left on my table, which I eventually did use, had covered a month of bills I had been dreading. I told myself a lot of things during those 2 weeks, most of which were not entirely honest. The truth was simpler and more complicated than any excuse I gave myself. I liked having him there. I liked the way the apartment felt less empty when his voice filled it, low and measured, discussing nothing important, asking about my shifts at the hospital, listening in a way that felt rare, like he was actually absorbing what I said, instead of waiting for his turn to speak. It was on a quiet evening, after Lily had gone to bed, that I finally asked him the question I had been avoiding since the night he first knocked on my door. "Who are you, Damien? Really?" He was sitting across from me at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee cooling between his hands, and for a long moment, he did not answer. The silence stretched long enough that I thought he might simply get up and leave, the way he had threatened to at the very beginning, before whatever this had become took root. "My name is Damien Cross," he said finally. "You may have heard of it." I had not. Not directly, but something in the careful, deliberate way he said it made my stomach tighten. "I have. In certain circles, yes." He turned the coffee cup slowly, watching the liquid swirl rather than looking at me. "I run an organization that does not always operate within the boundaries of the law. The people who tried to kill me 3 weeks ago were rivals within that world. People who believe my position would be better held by someone else." He said it plainly, without drama, the way a man might describe an ordinary occupation, and somehow that plainness made it land harder than if he had tried to soften the truth or dress it in excuses. I sat very still, letting the words settle, watching him for any sign that he expected me to react with fear or judgment, though his own expression remained carefully guarded, as if he had already prepared himself for whatever I might say next. The kitchen felt suddenly smaller, the walls pressing closer, though nothing about the room had changed. I had suspected, of course, from the very first night, that whatever chased him to my door was not ordinary trouble, but hearing him say it plainly, without excuse or softening, made the danger feel real, in a way it had not before. "You should have told me this before you kept coming back," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. I know. He finally looked up, and there was something almost apologetic in his expression, an emotion that seemed foreign on a face built for control. I told myself I was protecting you by staying quiet. But the truth is, I did not want to see you look at me the way you are looking at me right now. How am I looking at you? Like you are calculating how fast you can get your daughter out of this apartment. He was not wrong, and the accuracy of it stung more than I wanted to admit. I glanced toward the hallway, toward Lily's closed bedroom door, and felt the familiar tightening of fear that came with being solely responsible for another person's safety, a fear that had shaped every decision I had made since the day she was born. I have a daughter, I said quietly. I cannot afford the kind of danger that follows you. I understand. He stood, setting the coffee cup down carefully, and for the first time since I had met him, he looked genuinely uncertain, like a man standing at the edge of a decision he did not want to make, but knew he had to. I will not come back if that is what keeps you both safe. He moved toward the door, and something in me, something I could not fully explain even to myself, made me speak before he could reach it. Wait. He stopped, his hand on the handle, exactly as he had that first night, and turned to look at me with an expression that held more hope than a man like him should have allowed himself to show. I am not saying stay, I said carefully, choosing each word like it mattered, because it did. I am saying I do not know what I am saying yet. Give me time to figure it out. A faint, almost unwilling smile crossed his face, the first genuine one I had seen from him. Time, I can give you. He left quietly after that, and I locked the door behind him, leaning my back against it for a long moment, listening to my own heartbeat slow gradually in the silence of the apartment. Lily's nightlight glowed faintly down the hallway, casting a soft amber light across the floor, and I found myself thinking about how differently this evening had gone from what I expected when I first woke that morning. Certain it would be an ordinary day of laundry and grocery lists, and nothing more remarkable than a tired 6-year-old refusing to eat her vegetables. I thought about Priya's warning, about the careful walls I had built around Lily's life since her father decided fatherhood was not something he wanted to carry. I thought about every reason a sensible woman would use to justify closing the door on a man who ran an organization built on danger, a man whose enemies had already tried once to kill him. And then I thought about the way he had looked at Lily's drawings, the way he had gone quiet and honest when speaking about the sister he lost, the careful, deliberate way he handled everything in my apartment, as though afraid of breaking something that was not his to break. None of it added up to safety. None of it added up to the kind of steady, predictable life I had promised myself I would build for my daughter. But somewhere in the space between fear and logic, something quieter and more stubborn had taken root, and I did not think time alone would be enough to talk myself out of it. After he left that night, I sat alone in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the door, replaying the conversation over and over, trying to make sense of the fact that a man who ran an organization built on danger and violence had somehow, in the space of a few weeks, become someone my daughter asked about by name, someone whose absence left the apartment feeling quieter than it used to. I told myself I was being careful. I told myself I was weighing the risks properly, the way any responsible mother should. But underneath the caution, something else had already taken root. Something that had nothing to do with logic, and everything to do with the way he had looked at Lily's crayon drawings like they mattered, the way he had sat perfectly still while I stitched a wound into his side, the way he had said my name before I ever gave it to him, as if some part of him had already decided I mattered before I had any say in the matter. I did not know yet how deep the danger around him really ran, or how soon it would find its way to my door again. I only knew that whatever careful walls I had built to protect myself and Lily were already beginning to crack, one quiet evening at a time, and I was no longer entirely sure I wanted to stop it. The car outside my building had been parked in the same spot for 2 hours before I noticed it, and by then, it was already too late to pretend I had not seen the man behind the wheel watching my front door. I was walking back from the corner store with a bag of milk and bread, Lily's small hand wrapped around 2 of my fingers, as she hummed a song from school, when I caught the reflection of the black sedan in the glass of the entrance door. The man inside was not hiding his interest. He was studying the building, studying the windows, studying, I realized with a cold drop in my stomach, exactly which floor my apartment sat on. I did not run. Running would have drawn attention, and every instinct I had, sharpened by years of reading danger in an emergency room, told me to move calmly, to get Lily inside, to lock the door, and call the one person who might know what this meant. "Mommy, why are we walking fast?" Lily asked, half skipping to keep up with my pace. "Just excited to get home and make dinner," I said, forcing lightness into my voice that I did not feel at all. Once inside, door locked, deadbolt turned, I set Lily up with a cartoon in the living room and stepped into the kitchen to call Damien, my hands trembling as I dialed the number he had finally given me 2 weeks earlier, after countless visits had worn down my resistance to keeping it. He answered on the second ring. "Grace." "There is a man watching my building," I said quietly, glancing toward the living room to make sure Lily was still absorbed in her show. "Black car. He has been outside for at least 2 hours." The silence on the other end lasted only a second, but it was long enough to tell me everything I needed to know about how seriously he took this. "Describe the car." I did, as precisely as I could, and I heard him relay the information to someone else in the room with him, his voice shifting into a tone I had not heard before, sharp, commanding, the voice of a man who was used to being obeyed instantly and without question. "Stay inside," he said, returning to me. "Do not open the door for anyone but me. I am coming now." "Damien, what is happening? Why would someone be watching my apartment?" "I do not know yet," he said, and for the first time, I heard something close to fear in his voice. Not for himself, I realized, but for us. "But I intend to find out before they get any closer to you." He arrived faster than I thought possible, and when I opened the door, he was not alone. 2 men stood behind him in the hallway, both large, both watchful, both carrying themselves with the same controlled tension I had first noticed in Damien the night he showed up bleeding at my door. He stepped inside quickly, scanning the apartment with sharp, assessing eyes, before turning his attention fully to me. "The car is gone," he said. "My men saw it leave the moment they arrived. Whoever it was, they were not planning to make a move today. They were watching, gathering information." "Information about what?" My voice cracked slightly, and I hated how exposed it made me feel. "About me? About Lily?" He was quiet for a moment, and the hesitation told me the answer before he spoke it. "About you. About your connection to me. If my enemies know I have been coming here, they will see you as a way to reach me." The floor seemed to tilt slightly beneath me. I sat down heavily on the edge of the couch, my mind racing through every worst possibility, every headline I had ever read about people caught in the crossfire of dangers they never chose for themselves. Lily's cartoon still played softly from the television, a strange, cruel contrast to the conversation happening only a few feet away. "You need to leave," I said, though the words tasted like ash even as I spoke them. "You need to stop coming here. If they think I matter to you, they will use that. I cannot put Lily in that kind of danger." "I know," Damien said, and the raw honesty in his voice surprised me. "You are right to be angry. You are right to want me gone." I told myself I was being careful enough, that no one was tracking my movements closely enough to find you. But I was wrong, and now you are paying the cost of my carelessness. His 2 men remained near the door, quiet and watchful, and I noticed the way their eyes never fully left the windows, scanning the street below, even while standing still inside my apartment. It was a small detail, but it told me something important about the life Damien actually lived, a life where vigilance never truly rested, where even a familiar hallway could hide a threat waiting to unfold. "I am not asking you to apologize. I am asking you to protect us by staying away." He crossed the room and knelt in front of me, bringing himself to eye level, an act of humility I would not have believed him capable of during our first meeting. "I can protect you better by staying close than by staying away. If I disappear now, they will assume the connection is real and important, and they will come for you regardless, hoping to use you against me. If I remain visible, careful, controlled, I can make it clear that harming you would bring consequences no one in my world wants to face." That does not sound like protection. That sounds like using us as a shield. "It is not that simple," he said, his voice low and steady, though I could see the effort it took him to keep it that way. "Let me explain how this world works, because I think you deserve to understand exactly what you have stepped into. Over the next hour, sitting in my living room, while Lily eventually drifted off to sleep on the couch beside us, Damien told me more about his life than he had in all the weeks before combined. He spoke of an organization built by his father decades earlier, inherited through blood and violence rather than choice, a position he had spent his entire adult life defending against men who believed strength alone should decide who led. He spoke of rivals circling for years, waiting for weakness, and of the attack that had sent him bleeding to my doorstep as the opening move in what he now believed was a coordinated attempt to remove him entirely. "The man who shot me works for someone named Victor Kane," he said, his jaw tightening at the name. "Kane has wanted my position for a long time. He is patient, calculating, and he does not care who gets hurt in pursuit of what he wants." He described Kane in careful detail, a man who had once served under Damien's father, before turning ambitious and resentful, someone who believed loyalty was a weakness rather than a virtue. Listening to him speak, I understood that this was not a simple rivalry born of a single disagreement, but years of carefully hidden resentment finally breaking into open conflict, and that I had walked, unknowingly, directly into the middle of it. "And you think he knows about me now?" "I think it is possible, yes, which is why I need you to trust me when I say the safest path forward is not distance, but protection. I can have men watching this building at all times. I can ensure Lily's school has additional security, without her ever noticing. I can make certain that anyone who thinks of using you against me understands the price of that decision before they ever attempt it." I studied his face, searching for any sign of manipulation, any indication that his concern was more about controlling the situation than genuinely protecting us. I found none. What I found instead was a man visibly wrestling with guilt, someone who had clearly never allowed himself to care about consequences beyond his own world, until Lily's crayon drawings and my stitches in his side had cracked something open in him he had not expected. "If I agree to this," I said slowly, "if I let you keep coming here, keep protecting us, I need honesty, complete honesty. No more discovering the truth only when danger is already outside my door." "You have it," he said without hesitation. "I swear that to you." Before he left that night, he explained a little more about the structure surrounding him, the careful hierarchy of loyalty and fear that kept his organization functioning, and the woman he trusted above all others within it, a woman named Elena, who had served beside his father before serving beside him. He told me she would likely come to assess me herself at some point, not out of hostility, but out of the same protective instinct that made her indispensable to him. "She will not be gentle," he warned. "Elena believes affection is a liability in our world. She has watched good men fall because they cared about the wrong person at the wrong moment. Do not mistake her bluntness for cruelty. She simply does not believe in wasting time on comfortable lies." "I think I would rather have bluntness," I said. "I have had enough of people softening the truth until it is unrecognizable." Something like respect flickered across his face at that, though he said nothing more about it, simply nodding once before stepping toward the door to leave for the night. The following days brought changes I noticed immediately, though most of them were quiet, unobtrusive, clearly designed not to frighten Lily or draw attention from neighbors. A man I did not recognize sat in a car near the building entrance during the hours I worked night shifts. Another walked the same route Lily took to school each morning, always a comfortable distance behind, always looking like nothing more than another parent or neighbor going about ordinary business. I hated how quickly I grew used to it, how the presence of danger around us became something I accepted rather than fought against. But underneath that unease sat a different feeling entirely, one I recognized but did not want to name. For the first time since Lily's father had left us both years earlier, I did not feel entirely alone in protecting her. Someone else was watching, someone else was worrying, someone else had decided that our safety mattered enough to reorganize his entire operation around it. It was nearly a week later, on a night when I had just finished a long shift at the hospital and returned home exhausted, that the danger stopped being theoretical and became immediate. I noticed the broken lock on my apartment door before I noticed anything else. The wood around the frame splintered slightly, the kind of damage that came from force applied carefully, deliberately, by someone who knew exactly what they were doing and did not want to be heard. My blood turned to ice. Lily was with her grandmother that night, A small mercy I would thank every stroke of luck for later. But in that moment, all I could think about was the man who might still be inside my apartment. I did not go in. I backed away from the door slowly, pulling my phone from my pocket with hands that shook so badly I nearly dropped it, and called Damien for the second time in a week with fear clawing up my throat. "Someone broke into my apartment," I whispered, pressed against the hallway wall, watching the door as though it might open at any moment. "I do not know if they are still inside." "Get to the stairwell," Damien said immediately, his voice sharp with a controlled urgency that somehow steadied me, even as panic threatened to take over completely. "Do not go near the door. I am sending men now, and I am coming myself. Stay on the phone with me." I moved as quietly as I could toward the stairwell at the end of the hall, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain it could be heard through the walls, and it was only once I reached the relative safety of the concrete stairs that I allowed myself to truly process what was happening. Someone had come into my home. Someone had decided that breaking down my door was an acceptable way to send whatever message Victor Kane intended to send. Damien's men arrived within minutes, moving through the building with a precision that told me this was not the first time they had handled situations like this. They cleared the apartment carefully, methodically, and when they finally confirmed it was empty, I was allowed back inside to survey the damage. Nothing had been stolen, nothing had been destroyed in any obvious way. But on my kitchen table, exactly where Damien's cash had once sat weeks earlier, someone had left a single item, a photograph of Lily walking home from school, taken from a distance close enough to prove they had been near her, close enough to prove this was not a threat aimed only at me. When Damien arrived and saw the photograph, something in his expression shifted into a coldness I had never witnessed from him before, a stillness that felt far more dangerous than any anger could have. He picked up the photograph carefully, studying it with the focus of a man committing every detail to memory, and when he finally looked up at me, his eyes carried a promise I did not fully understand yet, but would come to recognize as absolute. "This ends now," he said quietly. "I will not allow anyone to threaten your daughter and continue breathing comfortably in this city. Damien, I do not want more violence. I want this to stop, not escalate." "I understand that," he said, moving closer, his hand reaching for mine with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the coldness still lingering in his eyes. "But you must understand something about the world I live in. Restraint is read as weakness. If I do nothing, Kane will only grow bolder, and the next message he leaves will not be a photograph." The weight of that truth settled over me heavily, and for the first time since this entire situation began weeks earlier, I understood fully that there was no path forward that did not involve some degree of danger, that safety for Lily now depended not on distance from Damien, but on his ability to end the threat entirely. "What are you going to do?" I asked quietly. "Whatever is necessary," he said, "to make certain nothing like this happens again." I did not sleep that night, sitting instead in my living room with every light on, listening to the quiet murmur of Damien's men stationed outside my door, and thinking about how quickly my careful, ordinary life had transformed into something I barely recognized. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, Damien returned briefly, his coat still damp from the rain that had begun falling outside, and he sat with me in the quiet living room, without speaking at first, simply present, a steady weight beside me on the couch. I found myself grateful for the silence, for the fact that he did not attempt to fill it with reassurances that would have felt hollow given everything that had happened. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if Lily had been home tonight," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "She was not," he said gently. "And from this point forward, she will never be left unprotected again, whether she is here, at school, or anywhere else. I give you my word on that, not as comfort, but as fact." "I believe you," I said, and I realized, somewhat to my own surprise, that I meant it completely. He stayed until the first gray light of morning began creeping through the windows, and though neither of us spoke much more, his presence steadied something in me that had been shaking loose since the moment I saw that splintered doorframe. Underneath the fear, I found something unexpected taking shape, a steady, quiet resolve that surprised me with its strength. I was not going to run from this. I was not going to let fear decide the shape of Lily's life, or my own. Whatever came next, I intended to face it standing beside the man who had, against every reasonable expectation, become someone I trusted with the most important thing in my life. Word spread through Damien's world faster than I ever expected, and within days, my name had become something whispered in rooms I would never enter, attached to a man whose enemies now saw me as leverage worth pursuing. Lily started asking questions I did not know how to answer during those days, small observant questions the way only children ask them, wondering why a strange car sometimes waited outside her school, why her teacher had started walking the youngest students to the gate personally, instead of letting them wander toward the pickup line alone. I answered as gently and vaguely as I could, telling her the world simply liked to keep careful watch over children, and she accepted the explanation with the easy trust of a 6-year-old, though the weight of the lie sat heavy in my chest every time I told it. I learned this not from Damien directly, but from Elena, a sharp-eyed woman who introduced herself as his second-in-command, arriving at my apartment one afternoon, while Damien was handling business elsewhere. She sat across from me at my kitchen table, dressed simply, but carrying herself with the same controlled authority I recognized from every person in Damien's orbit, and she did not waste time with pleasantries. "You should know what you have become," she said, folding her hands neatly in front of her. "Within our circles, you are no longer just a woman Damien visits. You are seen as his weakness, and weaknesses get tested." "I did not ask to be anyone's weakness," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "No one ever does." Her expression softened slightly, the first hint of sympathy I had seen from her. "But Damien has not looked at anyone the way he looks at you in the 15 years I have worked beside him. That kind of change does not go unnoticed, and in our world, unnoticed is the only safe way to exist." I absorbed her words slowly, feeling the full weight of what I had unknowingly stepped into. This was not simply about a broken lock or a photograph left on my table. I had become a symbol, a visible crack in the armor of a man who ruled through fear and precision, and every enemy circling him now understood that hurting me might accomplish what direct violence against him had failed to achieve. "What do I do with that?" I asked quietly. "You survive it," Elena said simply, "and you decide whether you are willing to live permanently inside the danger that comes with loving a man like Damien Cross." She studied me for a long moment, her sharp eyes moving over my face, as though searching for cracks she expected to find. "May I ask you something honestly, Grace?" "Of course." "Why did you let him stay that first night? You are a nurse. You know the risks of harboring a stranger with a gunshot wound better than most people would. You could have called the police the moment he knocked. Most people would have." I thought about the question carefully before answering, wanting to give her something true rather than something simple. I have spent my career watching people make split-second decisions about who deserves help and who does not. I decided a long time ago that I did not want to be the kind of person who calculates worthiness before offering someone basic humanity. He was bleeding. He was afraid, even if he tried to hide it. That was enough for me. Elena's expression shifted slightly, something almost like approval settling into the sharp lines of her face. "That is either the most foolish reasoning I have ever heard, or the wisest. I have not decided which yet." "Maybe it can be both," I said. She allowed herself a small, unexpected smile at that, the first genuine warmth I had seen from her since she arrived. "Damien is fortunate. You did not simply call the police that night. I do not say that lightly. I have buried too many people in this life to hand out sentiment easily." Before she left, she gave me a phone number I was to call only in emergencies, separate from Damien's own line, explaining that if anything ever happened where I could not reach him directly, she would ensure help arrived regardless. It was a small gesture, but it told me something important about the world I was stepping into, a world where loyalty, once earned, ran deep enough to outlast fear itself. The word loving hit me harder than I expected, mostly because some part of me had already been avoiding it, avoiding the honest acknowledgement of what these weeks had grown into. I had told myself I was protecting my daughter, weighing risks logically, allowing Damien's presence out of gratitude and practicality rather than anything deeper. But sitting across from Elena, hearing her speak the words so plainly, I could no longer pretend the feeling settling in my chest whenever Damien walked through my door was anything other than exactly what she named it. That evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Damien arrived looking more exhausted than I had ever seen him. his usual composed control fraying slightly at the edges. He sat across from me at the same kitchen table where Elena had spoken so plainly hours earlier, and for a long moment, neither of us said anything at all. "Kane made a move today," he finally said. "Not against you, against one of my own operations, a warehouse near the docks. 3 of my men were hurt. He is testing how far I am willing to let this go before I respond in kind. Are they going to be all right, your men?" Something flickered across his face, surprise perhaps, that my first question was concern for people I had never met, rather than fear for myself. "They will recover, but this cannot continue, Grace. Kane will keep escalating until one of us is removed entirely from this conflict, permanently. And you intend for that to be him. I intend to end this before it reaches you or Lily again," he said, his voice carrying a certainty that both reassured and frightened me in equal measure. "But I need to know something first, and I need you to answer honestly, regardless of what you think I want to hear." "What?" He was quiet for a moment, his thumb tracing an absent pattern against the wood grain of the table, as though gathering the courage to ask something that mattered more to him than he wanted to admit. Outside, rain had begun tapping softly against the window, the only sound in the apartment besides our own breathing. "Do you regret opening your door that night?" The question hung between us, heavier than anything Elena had said earlier that day. I thought back to that first knock, the blood on my doorstep, the decision I made against every rational instinct I possessed. I thought about the weeks since, the fear, the danger now circling my daughter's life, but also the quiet evenings, the way Lily's face lit up whenever he arrived, the steady presence that had somehow, impossibly, made me feel less alone than I had in years. "No," I said, and I meant it completely. "I do not regret it." Something shifted in his expression, relief and disbelief tangled together, as though he had genuinely expected a different answer. He reached across the table and took my hand, his grip careful, deliberate, like he was afraid I might pull away. "I have spent my entire life believing that people like me do not get to have this," he said quietly. "Ordinary evenings. A child who draws pictures for me. A woman who stitched my wounds and then stayed, even after learning exactly what I am. I told myself years ago that love was a luxury my position could not afford, that anyone who mattered to me would only become a target, a weakness Kane and men like him would exploit. That is exactly what Elena told me today. She is right to worry," he admitted, "but I am done pretending that distance protects you better than honesty does. You already carry the danger of knowing me, Grace. Pretending otherwise only leaves you unprepared for it." He paused, his thumb tracing slowly across my knuckles, and when he spoke again, his voice dropped into something quieter, something more vulnerable than I had ever heard from him. "You belong by my side," he murmured, his dark eyes holding mine with an intensity that stole the breath from my lungs. "Not because I need a shield, not because it would be convenient for how the world sees me, but because you are the only person in 15 years who looked at what I am and chose to stay anyway. I do not know how to protect you from every danger this life brings, but I know I do not want to face any of it without you standing beside me." Tears gathered in my eyes before I could stop them, a mixture of fear and something warmer, something I had not allowed myself to feel fully until this exact moment. "I have a daughter, Damien. Whatever I choose, it has to be safe for her too." "I know," he said firmly, "and I will spend every resource I have, every connection, every ounce of power this position gives me, ensuring that safety. But I cannot promise a life without risk. I can only promise that I will never stop fighting to protect what we are building, for as long as you allow me to be part of it." I thought of Lily asleep in her room, innocent of the danger circling her small, ordinary life, and I thought of the man in front of me, willing to burn down an empire to keep her safe. The choice should have felt impossible, torn between logic and fear and something that felt suspiciously like love. But sitting there with his hand wrapped around mine, it felt clearer than anything had in years. "Then finish this," I said quietly. "End the threat properly, completely, so we never have to live looking over our shoulders. And when it is over, I will stand beside you, openly, without hiding what this has become." He brought my hand to his lips, pressing a kiss against my knuckles with a reverence that felt entirely at odds with the ruthless reputation that preceded him everywhere else in the city. Then I will not fail you." He stayed a little longer that night, and for a while, we spoke of ordinary things, small comforts that felt strangely precious against the backdrop of everything looming ahead: Lily's upcoming school play, a recipe Damien claimed his mother used to make, the quiet, simple details of lives that had somehow become tangled together, despite every reason they should not have been. When he finally left, the apartment felt fuller somehow, even in his absence, as though some part of him had settled permanently into its walls. 2 days later, everything changed again, faster and more violently than either of us anticipated. I was leaving the hospital after a long overnight shift, exhausted and craving nothing more than sleep, when a car pulled up beside me in the nearly empty parking garage, moving too quickly, too deliberately, for it to be anything other than exactly what my instinct screamed it was. Before I could react, before I could even reach for my phone, 2 men emerged, moving with the same trained precision I had come to recognize in Damien's own guards, except these men wore no familiar faces, and their intentions were unmistakably hostile. I fought harder than I ever thought myself capable of, years of pent-up fear and determination fueling every strike, every desperate attempt to break free, but they were stronger, trained for exactly this kind of encounter, and within moments, I found myself forced into the back of their car, a cloth pressed hard against my mouth, the world tilting sideways before darkness swallowed everything entirely. When I woke, my head throbbing, my wrists bound tightly behind me, I was sitting in what looked like an abandoned office, dust thick on every surface, weak light filtering through boarded windows. A man stood across the room, watching me with cold, calculating eyes, dressed sharply despite the grime surrounding him, and I understood immediately, with a certainty that turned my blood to ice, that I was looking at Victor Kane himself. My mind raced back through the hours before I lost consciousness, trying to piece together how I had ended up here, how quickly an ordinary walk through a hospital parking garage had turned into something I had only ever read about in the kind of stories I never expected to live inside. I thought of Lily, safe for the night with her grandmother, and felt a small, desperate relief that at least she was not somewhere close enough to be caught in whatever this man intended. "Grace Bennett," he said, his voice smooth, almost pleasant, which somehow made it more terrifying than shouting would have. "I have heard so much about you. It seems Damien Cross has finally found something worth losing everything for." "He will find you," I said, forcing steadiness into my voice despite the terror clawing through my chest. "And when he does, whatever mercy you might have hoped for will be gone." Kane smiled, unbothered, crouching slightly to bring himself to my eye level. "That is precisely what I am counting on." The rope around my wrists cut into my skin every time I shifted, and I forced myself to breathe, slowly, evenly, the way I had trained countless panicked patients to do in the emergency room, because falling apart now would accomplish nothing except giving Victor Kane exactly the reaction he wanted. He paced the dusty office slowly, his footsteps echoing against bare concrete, studying me the way a man studies a piece on a chessboard, calculating his next move with unhurried confidence. "Damien Cross has spent 15 years building a reputation for being untouchable," he said, almost conversationally, as though we were discussing the weather rather than my kidnapping. "Cold, efficient, never allowing anything close enough to be used against him. And then you appeared, and suddenly the untouchable man has a door I can walk straight through. He is going to destroy you for this," I said, keeping my voice level despite the fear tightening my throat. "Perhaps," Kane said, unbothered, "but not before I destroy the one thing he has finally allowed himself to care about. You see, I do not actually need to hurt you, Miss Bennett. I only need him to believe I might. And I need him distracted, desperate, making mistakes he would never make with a clear head. Grief is a wonderful weapon. It has ended more powerful men than knives ever have." My mind raced, searching for anything useful in the sparse room, anything that might buy time or create an opportunity. But the ropes held firm, and the single door across the room remained guarded by 2 of Kane's men, both watching me with the flat, disinterested expressions of people who had done this kind of work many times before. "You are wrong about one thing," I said, forcing steadiness into my voice, even as my heart pounded violently against my ribs. "He is not distracted because he loves me. He is more dangerous because of it. You have given him a reason to stop holding back." Something flickered across Kane's face. A brief flash of uncertainty quickly smoothed over by practiced composure. But I had seen it, and I held on to that small crack like a lifeline. Hours passed in that dim, dusty room, though it was impossible to know exactly how many. Kane left at some point, leaving only his 2 guards behind, and I spent the time studying every detail of my surroundings, cataloging exits, weaknesses, anything that might matter if an opportunity arose. My training had taught me to stay calm under pressure, to think clearly when everything around me demanded panic, and I clung to that discipline with everything I had left. At some point during those long hours, one of the younger guards, a man who could not have been older than his early 20s, brought me a cup of water, holding it to my lips since my hands remained bound. There was something uncertain in the way he moved, none of the flat professional coldness the other guard carried, and I found myself studying him the way I studied frightened patients in the emergency room, looking for the small human cracks that might be useful later. "How long have you worked for him?" I asked quietly, once the water was gone. "Long enough to know better than to answer questions like that," he muttered, though he did not move away immediately. "You do not look like you enjoy this kind of work." He glanced toward the door, checking that his colleague was still occupied elsewhere, before answering in a low voice, "Nobody enjoys this, but Kane pays well, and pay is pay." He hesitated, then added, almost reluctantly, "For what it is worth, he does not usually let hostages go unharmed. You should know that." The warning settled cold in my stomach, but I filed away the detail carefully, along with everything else I noticed in that room: the single door, the boarded window with a gap wide enough to see a sliver of street beyond it, the schedule of the guard's shift changes that seemed to happen roughly every 3 hours. None of it guaranteed escape, but it was information, and information was the only weapon I had left. I did not know it yet, but outside that abandoned building, an entire city was being turned inside out in search of me. Damien later told me what those hours looked like from his side, though it took weeks before he spoke of it in full detail, as though even the memory of that fear cost him something to revisit. He had arrived at the hospital parking garage within 20 minutes of my disappearance, alerted by a security camera that caught the tail end of the struggle, and the moment he saw the footage, something in him broke that had never broken before, not through years of violence, not through the death of his own sister, not through any battle he had fought to hold his position. He mobilized every resource his organization possessed, calling in favors from people who owed him loyalty spanning decades, pressuring informants across the city with a ruthlessness Elena later described as unlike anything she had witnessed from him in 15 years of working by his side. He did not sleep, he did not eat. He moved through the city like a man possessed by something beyond fear, tracking every lead, however small, that might point toward where Kane was holding me. It was a driver, a low-level member of Kane's organization, who had grown tired of watching his boss's growing recklessness endanger everyone beneath him, who finally gave Damien the location, whispered quietly, in exchange for protection and a new life, far from the city entirely. By the time Damien's men surrounded the abandoned building where I was being held, night had fully fallen, and exhaustion had settled deep into my bones, though fear kept me sharp despite it. I heard the commotion before I understood what it meant, shouting outside, the sudden tension rippling through my guards as they exchanged uneasy glances, hands moving toward weapons. The door burst open, and for one terrifying moment, I did not know whether the figures rushing in were rescue or further danger, until I saw him. Damien moved through that room, like something unstoppable. Controlled violence and precision combined into a force that dropped both guards. Before Ainser fully registered what was happening, his eyes found mine immediately, and the relief that crossed his face, raw and unguarded in a way I had never seen from him, told me everything about the hours he had spent believing he might not find me in time. Grace. He crossed the room in seconds, kneeling to cut the ropes binding my wrists with careful, urgent hands, his fingers brushing against the raw skin gently, as though even now, in the middle of danger, he could not bear to cause me further pain. "Are you hurt? Tell me the truth." "I am all right," I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to steady it. "Scared, but all right." He pulled me into his arms then, holding me with a desperate tightness that told me more about the depth of his fear than any words could have, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke, simply breathing together, in the aftermath of terror neither of us had fully processed yet. "Kane," I finally said, pulling back slightly. "He was here earlier. He said this was about drawing you out, making you desperate enough to make mistakes." Something cold settled over Damien's expression, the same stillness I had seen the night the photograph of Lily appeared on my kitchen table, except sharper now, more absolute. Then he will get exactly the reaction he wanted, but not the outcome he expected. Outside, his men had already begun moving through the building, securing the perimeter, and it became clear quickly that Kane himself was not present, having left before Damien's arrival, likely already aware that his location had been compromised. Damien's jaw tightened at this news, but he did not let it distract him fully from getting me somewhere safe, wrapping his coat around my shoulders and guiding me carefully toward the waiting cars outside. The drive back felt strangely silent, both of us processing the night in our own way, my body finally allowing the adrenaline to drain away now that the immediate danger had passed. Damien kept one hand wrapped firmly around mine the entire way, occasionally glancing over, as though needing constant reassurance that I was truly there beside him, truly safe, truly real. At my apartment, once I had showered away the dust and fear clinging to my skin, I found him sitting at the kitchen table exactly where he always sat, though tonight his usual composure had cracked entirely. His head bowed, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. I sat down across from him quietly, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. "I almost lost you," he finally said, his voice raw in a way I had never heard from him. 15 years I have led this organization, and I have never once felt fear the way I felt it tonight, believing I might not reach you in time. "You did reach me," I said gently, reaching across the table for his hand. "This time," he said, "but Kane is still out there, and he will not stop simply because tonight failed. I need you to understand that fully, before we go any further, Grace. This danger does not end quickly, and it does not end easily." "I understand that," I said, and I meant it with a clarity that surprised even me. But sitting in that room tonight, all I could think about was getting back to you and to Lily. Not running from this life, but fighting for it. I am not asking you to make this safer than it is. I am asking you to let me stand beside you while we make it safe together. The following days moved in a blur of careful planning, hushed conversations I was not always included in, and a tension that hung over every moment, despite Damien's obvious efforts to shield me and Lily from the worst of it. Elena visited more frequently, her usual composed demeanor replaced by focused urgency, and I understood, without needing it explained fully, that Damien's entire organization was mobilizing toward a confrontation that could no longer be avoided or delayed. "He will come for me directly now," Damien told me one evening, sitting across from me at my kitchen table, in a scene that had become achingly familiar over these past months. "Kane understands that kidnapping you failed to break me the way he hoped. His next move will be more direct, more desperate." "I want to help," I said, surprising myself with how firmly the words came out. Damien's eyes met mine, searching my face carefully. "This is not your fight, Grace." "It became my fight the moment they took me from that parking garage," I said. "I am not asking to hold a weapon or walk into danger unprepared, but I refuse to sit here, helpless, while you risk everything to end this. Let me help, however I actually can." He studied me for a long moment, something like respect settling into his expression, alongside the worry that never fully left his eyes these days. "Kane trusts very few people completely, but he has always underestimated women, seeing them as tools rather than threats. That arrogance might be useful." Over the following 2 days, a plan took shape. One that used my medical training and my unexpected proximity to Kane's world, established during my kidnapping, to help create an opening Damien's men could exploit. I would not be anywhere near actual danger. Damien made that condition absolute and non-negotiable. But the information I provided about the building where I had been held, about the guards' habits and weaknesses I had carefully observed during those long, frightening hours, proved more valuable than anyone expected. The confrontation itself happened on a rain-soaked night nearly a week after my rescue, in the same warehouse district where Kane had first struck against Damien's operations. I waited at my apartment, Lily asleep in her room, unaware of the danger unfolding across the city, while Elena stayed with me, both of us listening to updates through a radio Damien had left, tension coiling tighter with every passing minute. When the call finally came, hours later, Damien's voice carried an exhaustion deeper than physical tiredness, the sound of a man who had just walked through violence and come out the other side, forever changed by it. "It is over," he said simply. "Cain will not threaten you or anyone else again." He did not offer details, and I did not ask for them, understanding instinctively that some truths were better left unspoken between us, protected by an unspoken agreement that allowed both of us to move forward without the weight of every specific detail. Elena arrived at my apartment the following morning, her usual sharp composure softened by visible relief, and she hugged me briefly, an act so unexpected from a woman who had once warned me that affection was a liability, that I nearly laughed through my own exhaustion. "You did well," she said simply. "Better than most people would have, in that room, under that kind of pressure. Damien was right to trust you." Her approval meant more than I expected, a quiet confirmation that whatever place I now held in this world had been earned, not simply granted out of Damien's affection alone. 3 weeks later, on a quiet Sunday afternoon that felt almost unbearably ordinary after everything we had survived, Damien stood in my kitchen, watching Lily color at the table, with the same careful attention he had shown that very first evening weeks ago, when this entire impossible story began. "I spoke with the people who answer to me," he said, once Lily had wandered off to find more paper. "Officially, formally, they understand that you and Lily are part of my life now, permanently, openly, without secrecy protecting either of us any longer." "That sounds terrifying," I admitted, though a smile tugged at my lips despite myself. "It is," he agreed, reaching for my hand across the table, the same gesture that had become so familiar over these past difficult months. "But it is also honest. Finally, completely honest, in a way I never believed my life could be." He knelt then, beside my chair, and from his jacket pocket, he produced a small box that made my breath catch entirely in my throat. "I know this is not how these things are supposed to happen," he said, his voice carrying a vulnerability that felt entirely at odds with the ruthless reputation I now understood was only ever half the truth about him. "I am not an easy man to love, Grace. My world will always carry risk, even now, even with Cain gone. But you saved my life the night you opened that door, and every single day since you have saved me again, in smaller, quieter ways I never knew I needed. You belong by my side. I have known that since the moment you said my name back to me without fear in your voice. Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving I am worthy of the trust you gave a stranger bleeding on your doorstep?" Tears blurred my vision as I looked at him, at the small ring catching the afternoon light, at the man who had walked into my ordinary life and rearranged every careful boundary I had built around it, and I thought of everything we had survived together, the fear and the danger and the quiet, unexpected tenderness that had grown steadily beneath all of it. "Yes," I said, and the word came easier than I ever imagined it would. "Yes, I will." Lily came running back into the kitchen at the sound of my voice, drawn by the emotion in the room, even without understanding its cause, and Damien scooped her up into his arms without hesitation, holding both of us close, as the last golden light of the afternoon spilled through the windows. The danger that had once defined every part of Damien's world had not disappeared entirely. I understood that clearly. Men like him carried certain risks that would never fully fade. But standing there in my small kitchen, surrounded by crayon drawings and quiet laughter, and the steady warmth of a love neither of us had expected to find, I understood something else with equal clarity. Whatever storms still waited ahead of us, I would not face them alone anymore, and neither would he. We had built something worth protecting, together, out of blood and fear and unexpected kindness, and I intended to stand exactly where I belonged, by his side, for as long as we both had breath to fight for it.